Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And it is time for another edition of Female First, which means we are once again joined by the gregarious, the grounded Yves. Oh. Welcome, Yves.
Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for the welcome. Grounded?
That's right. I brought out a big word.
Grounded. Yeah, gregarious.
Right. Gregarious?
I think you're grounded.
I appreciate that.
You are very grounded. I will give you that.
I feel like it varies from moment to moment.
That's true. I think that's a fair thing. All of us.
In general.
You know, some days you have a day you're not so grounded, and that's just how it is. We're all making it through the best we can.
Mm.
Well, we are always happy to have you, Yves. What have you been up to since the last time we spoke?
A lot. I am just getting back to Georgia I was on the West Coast for like a month. So I went from Northern California in Sonoma County, like chilling, looking at the nice view, staring at a vineyard across the street, hanging out with two cats, like living a very peaceful. Oh, there was a garden. I picked like fresh stuff from their garden every day at the house I was staying at. It was really, really lovely. And then did a little hop skip to San Francisco to a day to see a band. And then it was a show that I was trying to catch, and it just like worked out perfectly to the one day I had between cities. It just so happened that was the day they were performing in the city that was closest to me. So, so I did that, and then I went over to Seattle and spent 2 weeks there at a couple of friends' home, house sitting for them. And that was the last month for me. I got back earlier this month, and that was a nice time in Seattle too. Like, it was like my third time there this year. So I was like coming back, hanging out with some folks. I felt like I was going on a bunch of go-sees to friends, like hanging out with friends while I was there. But it was really nice. I enjoyed it.
See, there's that gregariousness. And you are coming at us from a library. And we were just talking about how amazing libraries are.
Yes. If you start me on this subject, I will never end. So I'm going to...
Yes, we're all big fans.
I'm going to stay succinct, but I was just telling them how there are so many different resources at different libraries. And I was just telling them how I noticed in certain parts of town, some are more well-resourced than others. But I mean, I think the message here is just to explore all the libraries that you can get to, because some might have things that you never knew you wanted, and you can go to them and get them. The one that I'm at now has craft classes and a craft room with sewing machines and supplies already there. So if you don't have space at home, or if you don't have objects, like you don't have a sewing machine, you don't have a button press, you don't have things you need to make it, maybe your library does. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe there's another one in the area close to you that does. But I just love libraries so much. Shout out to all the librarians. Like, shout out to them. Like, I love libraries.
Yes, we do too. I feel like every time Samantha and I have traveled together, we have stopped at a library. We've gone out of our way.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, they're so cool. They're so cool.
Aren't they?
Speaking of, I love the person you brought today. I really enjoyed looking at the photography. It was a wonderful excuse to look at some just stunning photography. So I can't wait to talk about it. Who did you bring for us today, Yves?
Today, we are talking about Homai Vyarawalla, and I am so excited to talk about her too. I was really excited to find her work because I wasn't familiar with her before I started looking up her story. She was India's first female photojournalist, and she was good at her job. You can find some photos of hers online. Go look through them, enjoy them. It's like, of course, photojournalism is always, it captures a time so beautifully. And Homai really enjoyed her job while she was doing it, and she had a long and illustrious career. So I too am so excited to talk about her. I have so much to say. Like, I don't even know if we have enough time to get through her entire story. But I do want to say that For this, I used a lot of India in Focus, Camera Chronicles of Homai Vyarawalla. It's a book by Sabina Gadihoke. I hope I'm pronouncing that last name correctly. But if you look up that name, India in Focus, Camera Chronicles of Homai Vyarawalla, a lot of the info that I'm going to be saying today, I got from that book. And it is, if you can get your hands on a copy of that book, just look through the pictures in there, because it's all compounded in there in a comprehensive way. So if you can find that book, get it, read it, look at the photos. It's really, really lovely.
Maybe request it at your local library.
100%. Yes.
Yes, but should we get into the history?
Yes. So Homai was born on December 9th, 1913. Her parents were Dasabai and Sunamai Hatiram. Her father, Dasabai, was a painter, but he did turn to acting for work since that was what was going to pay the bills. He worked with the traveling Parsi theater company, and you'll hear Parsi come up again in this conversation because her family was Parsi. The Parsis are people who descended from Persian Zoroastrians who fled to India to avoid religious persecution. So when Homai was a baby, she went around with her father's troop across India and Southeast Asia. And she had two brothers, but they were sent to live with their grandparents in Bombay, which is now Mumbai. You'll hear me refer to some of these cities in their colonial names. That's because that's what they were called at this time. But I'll also refer to their modern names when they first come up, just so y'all know. But when Homai turned 2 years old, an astrologer predicted that she was destined to walk among royalty and important people. I love that part of her story. But Homai knew Urdu. Her parents were intent on her learning English, though. She enrolled in the Grand Road High School. And when she enrolled, there were only 6 or 7 girls in her school. But by the time she was about to graduate, she was the only girl in a class of 35 boys. And while they were in Bombay, the family moved from one house to the next, depending on how their money was doing. But as far as Homai, people considered her well-dressed. And she said that it was her job every Sunday to wash the saris. Sometimes she would make clothing. She would stitch a matching blouse with a bunch of cloth. But still at this time, the family didn't have a whole ton of money. When her school fee was increased up to 7 rupees, she told the headmaster that she was going to drop out. But he ended up making an exception for her, and she only had to pay a little bit over 3 rupees for the rest of the time she was in school. So just for a little background on her school experience, in the Parsi schools, it was encouraged for children often not to become involved in politics. And Homai couldn't wear a cotton sari because of his associations with the nationalist movement. And at the time, Parsis were kind of thought of as being friendly to the Indians and loyal to the British. But in terms of her home life, in 1931, her father found out that his theater company was shutting down. And Homai did pass her exams. And he wrote a letter to Homai, her dad did, and he said he was proud of her, but he was sorry that he couldn't send her any money to help with her tuition. And in his last letter, he mentioned that the owner of the theater company hadn't responded about paying him. And just so y'all know too, if y'all get your hands on that book, there are some images of some of those letters as well, so you can kind of read through those. But her father was in Burma, which is now Myanmar, and he was really sick. And he finally had gathered up enough money to return home, but he died soon after he had surgery at a hospital in Bombay, unfortunately. Homai was pretty young at the time. So her mother wore a black sari a lot. She didn't leave the house much after that happened. But Homai was getting older. And so she met someone named Manek Shah in 1926 at a railway station. And he was playing with developing film. And so Homai ended up getting into that too. And they also got into a relationship. So this is the beginnings of her interest in photography. Anyway, Homai attended St. Xavier's in Bombay for economics for a couple of years. And at first, her college education was funded by a scholarship from a Parsi charity. She also went to this school called the JJ School of Arts to get a diploma in the arts teachers course. And while she was at that school, she would take photos of the activities there. And she borrowed one of Manek Shaw's cameras to take the photos. She later said that the training that she got while she was there in classical composition was really helpful for her photography. And so at the time, Homai and Manek Shaw, their photos were getting them about 1 or 2 rupees per print. So she was getting paid for her photos, even though it was a little at the time. She was getting paid. And she said that the first thing they would do with their money is go to the movie theater. Some of the movies that Homai liked were Ben-Hur, Gone with the Wind, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Scarface, and some other movies. So she clearly had a wide range. Yeah, I know. Samantha's like, that's an interesting variety.
Broad, Scarface and Gone with the Wind.
Eclectic.
Homai began her career in photography by assisting Manek Shaw. And her photos and accompanying text, they were initially printed under his name and they were credited with his initials. So some of the photos you'll see, if you look at the clips, you'll see his initials under them, but she took them. But Homai was less interested in studio photography, which she called armchair photography. So she already kind of knew her lane from early on, it seemed like. In the 30s and the 40s, she took photos of urban and suburban life in Bombay. Some of her early photos were published in Parsi newspapers. And she and Manek Shah took photos of the streets, festivals, and the work and day-to-day activities of the people who lived in those places. When World War II began, she put together photo stories on the war effort. And a lot of these stories were first printed in the Illustrated Weekly of India. And that weekly was edited by an English guy and often uplifted British interests in India. And British supported media needed to encourage Indians to support the British war effort, even though Indians at the time were also organizing for their own independence from the British. But Homai ended up marrying Manek Shah on January 19th, 1941. And she continued to take pictures. So in some of her earlier spreads, she would also show Parsi women who were trained for rescue activities during the war. She also showed women in like domestic and public life in other ways. Most of those women in there were Parsi and British women. And eventually, Manek Shah was offered a job with the Far Eastern Bureau. So they moved from Bombay to Delhi when Homai was 7 months pregnant. She ended up having her child. It was a son named Farooq. And so the family dynamic started to change. She had a family. She was growing her family. And Manek Shah was managing the family's money. He, though, wasn't as adventurous and social as Homai. He kind of went from the home to the office and back, which meant that Homai kind of had to be like that too. But she did work as a press photographer for the British Information Services. And she did that all the way up until 1951. And afterwards, she continued to work for them as a freelancer, but we'll get to that a little later. But yeah, she worked really hard to balance her photography life and her home life. And she would do a lot of darkroom work as well. She would be up at like 4:30 in the morning to get milk. And then she would get back after midnight after photographing some event. And then here's a quote from her. She said this: "I would be rushing between the kitchen where something was cooking and the darkroom where I was developing." And she also said this: "In the meantime, the phone would ring and I would have to change and rush out to take pictures." And then she would go on to say, "Later, I would return to the half-cooked food and change again. It was a mad rush, but fun." So that feels like a great like imagery, really like a tangible way of feeling how much she was going between her photography life and her home life. Like she was literally putting down some of the domestic activities that she was doing, going out to photograph and coming back. That sounds tiring to me, but she was doing it and she was doing it often. But in terms of her own personal interests, she liked crime and detective books. She also liked reading books on alternative medicine and cooking. And she biked to work for a long time. But in 1955, she and her husband ended up buying a Fiat. But of course, there was a lot going on in India at the time. So during partition, violence came really close to the Vyarawallas and Connaught Place, which is where they lived. Her landlords were Muslim. They had to leave their home and flee to the camps. And Hindu families were throwing burning rags into the family-owned shop that was below their place. And she said, we would keep big vessels full of water ready to put out the fire and would stand on the balcony laughing and talking so that people would think that a Parsi family stayed there. She said that they stayed dressed all the time in case there was an emergency. And eventually a Hindu family came and occupied the shop and forced one of the landlord's sons to sign away the property at knife point. So in the 1930s, the colonial state put restrictions on the publication of images of nationalist leaders in newspapers, but there were still freelance photographers who were documenting events that were happening in the freedom struggle. And Homai was taking photos of politicians. And one of the politicians that she took photos of was Jawaharlal Nehru. And she took photos of him like the most. He liked being photographed and he would often like put on a show for pictures. So he was a good subject of her photographs as well. Homai said that she had a lot of patience and she would wait until the people she was photographing were relaxed in front of the camera. So she described how oftentimes other people they thought they had gotten a shot, the thing had happened. So she would stick around. And so she would get more dynamic images that other people weren't getting because of the patience that she had. She said she liked to use low angle shots. She used daylight flash for the people who are interested in the technicals of it, and backlighting to highlight her subjects amongst their surroundings. And big night, the night India got its independence, of course, Homai was going to want to catch some photos. That was in August of 1947. Homai went to the Parliament House to cover it, but because she was with the British Information Services, she wasn't let in. But she was able to take photos of the celebratory events that followed. So there are some interesting points about like what people liked and didn't like because she was photographing all these dignitaries and important people. And one of the other people that she photographed was Gandhi. So he didn't like camera flashes though. So very different than Nehru. He reportedly said to her when she took one picture, "This girl will not rest until she makes me blind." The day that Gandhi was assassinated, she was on her way to record with him actually. And she had her color movie camera at a prayer meeting at Birla House. And her husband told her not to go because he would join her with a still camera the next day. But not long after, he told her that Gandhi was murdered. And she missed out on capturing that moment with Gandhi. And during Gandhi's funeral procession, Homai and her husband, they did get photos. They even had permission from some of the car owners to stand on their cars and take pictures. And Homai said that Gandhi's teachings like really resonated with her. She said that she liked his moral values and how he stood up to the British Empire and much more about him. But she said that she also admired him for his sensible ideas and teachings, many of which I have always kept in mind. So there is a quote that I want to share about Homai and kind of why she didn't like studio photography. She said this: "I have never asked anyone to pose for me. I don't like it because the moment the subjects know that they are being photographed, a change comes over their countenance. The whole atmosphere changes. The body becomes stiff and the eyes open up a bit, which is not natural. When you take a picture, it's always in a split second. You either take it or miss it, and that must be the right moment. So Homai also preferred black and white photography over color. She actually didn't have a wide angle or a telephoto lens until later in her career. But at first, she could work well without having those because their security at first wasn't a big deal when she was photographing. So she was able to get a little closer to some of her subjects, even though they were these big names. She also said that her subjects were comfortable with her because they knew that she would never ridicule them. But this is funny. Homai was accident prone, apparently. Fortunately, her cameras never took a big hit, except for once when she broke her wooden speed graphic camera. But she had a friend whose name was Ajit Singh who would repair her cameras and would build makeshift accessories for her. So even though she was accident prone, she knew she had someone on her side who worked with her, who was cool with her, who was good at what they did, even made accessories for her. So she was golden. She was covered, even though she was accident prone. She carried around, and I'm just imagining this picture of Homai. So first of all, she's one of the only women who's in a sea full of other photojournalists who are men. She's carrying around 2 big bags. So one of them had flash bulbs in it. The other one had fuse bulbs in it. She carried 2 or 3 cameras, a movie camera sometimes, film, the flash box, and a wooden tripod. She used an electronic flash that weighed like 18 pounds. So she's carrying around these huge, huge bags. It's so much equipment that she's carrying around. So I also kind of want to give her some grace on being accident prone because it's a fast-paced job. There are going to be a lot of people around. The pressure is on to get the shot. You have to put yourself in weird positions, especially if you're working with, you're making do with the equipment that you have. She didn't have specific lenses. So, I mean, I imagine a lot of times things were super precarious anyway, so you can't fault her for having like accidents. But there was a time because she liked wearing a sari, there was a time when she was taking a photo in 1959 that her sari tore. And after this, she switched up her outfits that she was wearing that were a little bit more practical for her work. She also talked about how developing film was like cooking. So she didn't measure chemicals a lot of the time. She just knew how to put in different things. She knew how much to put in after she had been working in a dark room so much. Homai captured photographs of lots of events that were happening, like the first Republic Day celebrations and the ceremony where Dr. Rajendra Prasad became the first president of independent India. And she said that of all of the leaders that she took photos of, she really liked Ho Chi Minh the most because of his simplicity and his humility. In 1961, when the British royal couple visited India, Homai was the only photographer who was allowed in when the entourage went into Victoria Memorial in Calcutta, which is now Kolkata. But one of the British High Commission tried to block her view when she was shooting a portrait of the Queen. And Homai apparently said this: "Remember, this is not the British Raj. You are allowed here only as our guests, so behave like one." And then she said, "The Queen must have heard me, as she was only 5 or 6 feet away. I'm told that the left front government has now removed the statue surrounding the Victoria Memorial. I feel sorry about that. You can't erase history like this." So yeah, I haven't seen, wish I had seen video of some of these encounters that she was having. But it's just really fascinating to me to think about how she was in so many rooms in such a fraught time over the course of such a pivotal moment in history. And she was present, but also in a way kind of like a fly on the wall. But also was able to form relationships with some of these people. Some of these people, which because she was photographing so often, I imagine they were a little deeper, but also it wasn't necessarily like they were always friendly relationships. So that kind of space she was moving in where they were personable, they had friendly relationships, but it wasn't friends, is very interesting to me. So Homai also documented the Dalai Lama's crossing into India in 1956 for Time Life. But things were changing for photography and photographers a lot. In 1969, Indira Gandhi became the Prime Minister of India. But over the next few years, inflation was growing, so was corruption. There was a lot of social upheaval. And Prime Minister Gandhi's security kept photographers from getting too close at this point. And Homai was becoming more disillusioned with how democracy was evolving in India. She said this: "There was no doubt that I was very happy in the British Raj because there was law and order in all kinds of facilities. We didn't have shortages. We had never heard the word pollution or adulteration or corruption. All these words came later. Independence came on a platter. It is only a few people who suffered and fought for it, and the rest had nothing to do with it. It came so easy to everybody that nobody appreciates it now. Freedom became a license to do what they liked." So, of course, Homai was telling certain stories through the photos she was taking, but she also had her own opinions. She, at this time, ended up voting against the Congress Party for the first time in her life. And these were some of her feelings about the politics and the way that society was changing. There was also, of course, the gender issue. Women saw Homai as different because of her job, because she was the first female press photojournalist in India. And also, men were hesitant to talk to her, according to Homai. But she said that they made it clear that their wives and daughters shouldn't do what she did. But at the same time, Homai would collaborate with her male colleagues. And sometimes they would even trade negatives, even though they worked for different agencies. And Homai's assignments took her all over India. She had no guides on all of her trips. She would often benefit from the kindness of strangers, especially when she would have no prior arrangements in a place. And there are some stories about how these interactions would happen. So there are also some spiritual elements of the work that Homai was doing. I know at first we talked about this astrologer in the beginning of her story who said that she would be around all these dignitaries and these important people. And that did end up happening in her life. But she also talked about how people would show up at the right time. And I'm kind of obsessed with this idea in the book. It's a few moments that stand out about somebody being there for her when she was lost and couldn't find her way. And all of a sudden, this person appeared on her path. And because of that, she now had a car and a driver that could take her around to the places she needed to go to. She might not have gotten the greatest pictures on that trip, but she was able to get some photos because of that person who showed up she didn't ask for. Or she went somewhere and she hadn't planned accommodations. And all of a sudden, somebody showed up and they had a place where she could stay and then she could eat meals. And it kind of stresses me out thinking about moving this way. But it also makes a lot of sense for her disposition and how she liked to be. She was a press photographer. She liked to do street photography. She liked more spontaneous moments. She didn't like staged moments. So it also really makes sense for her to be open to just being like, I'm going. I don't really know. I don't have a very meticulous itinerary planned out for what I'm doing. But, it's going to work out. And it did a lot of the time for her. So she got that evidence. So it's like, hey, guess I'll do it this way again. but she was also very involved in the photographer's world, her community. She and her friends formed the News Cameramen's Association, which was one of the first unions of photographers in independent India. She was one of the association's presidents. And a lot of other people liked her. They looked up to her. She was an authoritative voice as well. Her nickname was Mummy. And she said this nickname helped put her on a pedestal, which gave her an advantage. So people called her that, but it's like, it also gave her this aura of having authority. There was this persona that she had that kind of kept people at a distance. She said that she was always in the crowd, but not a part of the crowd. And she also said that she was really stern in professional settings. She said, quote, "There was no hanky-panky." Yeah, I know. Like, as in, it was no funny business. There was no back and forth when she was around. Like, she came to do her job. So Manek Shah died in May of 1969. It was pretty tragic. He had drunk an anti-termite solution that he thought was medicine he was supposed to take. And he died. And that was, of course, a really sad moment for Homai. And at the same time, Delhi was changing. Like we just talked about, photography was changing. There was a new generation of photographers. And Homai was kind of feeling like these photographers weren't the same as they used to be. There was also more security around her photography subjects. And a lot of her photography colleagues were also dying. And her son was working at the Birla Institute of Technology and Science in Pilani, which is west of New Delhi. And he asked Homai to join him. So she sold her house in Has Khas in Delhi, and she stopped taking pictures. And she said, it was just like that. One day I decided that this is enough. She told all her colleagues she was done with photography. And she said this: it was the same routing, going out, taking pictures, and things were not that exciting any longer. When something goes down, you do not want to go down with it. You have reached a particular peak where you have taken the best of things. I had shot important people from all over the world. You do not want to go for small things then, for people who are not gracious, dignified, and sincere. I missed that graciousness, and when it was gone, my interest in photography was gone as well. I think that is very interesting. I mean, I think anybody who's been working over so many decades in a specific industry will feel some of that, especially an artistic one and one that involves technology. I'm sure y'all can relate. Y'all are in the podcast world. And seeing how things are changing in technology at the same time, the culture around photography was changing too. The way that people were interacting with their photography subjects, the photographers were changing. And so I think that's interesting, but I think that's also paired with Homai's feelings about politics. So we kind of also talked about how she was nostalgic about the old times under colonial rule and how they were different, how they were more refined, how they were polished. So there's definitely a personal political bent here in her feelings about how things were changing. And that is nuanced. So some of these things that were actually the difficulties of the turbulence of so much political change happening, and also a little bit of nostalgia for the old times, old ways. We're all joining with the fact that she had been doing this for so long and things in her family were changing and she was losing people. I'm sure that was very difficult. So she was in Pilani now, and she joined the ladies' club. She took on new hobbies like macrame. And once Indira Gandhi mentioned Homai in an interview, people in Pilani began to learn about her previous life as a press photographer And so there was all this chatter about her. News was spreading. She was starting to get all these requests for work. But she just kept on doing things like cooking, going to ladies' club and gardening. She wasn't worried about taking no photos no more. And she said it was in Palani that she understood women could be good friends too, and that she shouldn't be afraid of them. Now, look, I know when I was reading this, I was thinking about this in modern times, how oftentimes people are like, I don't have women friends. You know, women are this way. They're catty to each other if they're in groups. All of these like very gendered feelings about women creating friendships with women and bonding with other women. But I know that we also have to consider that Homai was also truly the only woman doing what she was doing. She was a pioneer, and that she talked about some of the actual experiences she had making difficulty and how this was also her, having difficulty with making friends with other women, and how some of this was also on her as well. So she did have these friendships, and this seems like a hard turn now being in a ladies' club after saying that you had difficulty being friends with women before. But so she was, her son, Farouk, got married in 1975. And after that, she stayed with them. But she didn't adjust well to this new arrangement. And so she checked herself into an elderly home in Calcutta. But she had a dream, one of these spiritual things going on now. Yeah, interesting choice. That Farouk was sick 3 months after that. And she moved back to Palani. It turned out that he did have typhoid at the time, but it wasn't until years later that he was diagnosed with bowel cancer. And he died on January 4th, 1988. And after her son died, she thought that nobody would be interested in some of her footage. She said that a whole box full of what she considered her best negatives got lost when she was moving from Palani to Baroda. She said she looked everywhere for them, but they were gone. And she said after having kept many negatives and prints for 23 years without anyone ever knowing she had been a photographer, she burnt some of them in Palani, and she also threw away a whole box full of movie films after her son died in Baroda. She said, quote, "I don't think I understood the value of my own pictures. I really regret that now." And that just makes me so sad. But after he died, she spent the rest of her life in Baroda. She had no pension. She was a freelancer. But even so, she gave away a lot of the money that she did have to charity. And she had a long-standing friendship with Hugh McInnes, who was her former Australian boss at the Far Eastern Bureau. And the two of them kept in touch until he died in 2004. And he wrote lots of letters to her over the 50 years that they were friends, from the 50s to the 90s. And some of those letters, you can see those images of those letters also in the book that I mentioned up top. So those are interesting to see, kind of the correspondence between the two of them and how she was thinking about photography and about some of her personal relationships that she had with people. So on her politics a little bit, she said this: "People often say to me, 'Are you supporting the British? Were you not glad about independence?' Of course I was happy about freedom, but everyone is not the same. There were also good things about some Britishers that I admired. Many say that they exploited us financially. What about the Indian Maharajas? Had they not exploited ordinary people for years? It's not as simple as being for or against the British. Maybe the answer lies somewhere in between." So I think it's interesting to think about her personal politics in the context of her being a photojournalist and a pioneering woman photojournalist at the time. So Homai, like a lot of the other people we've talked about in Female First, kind of had this like rediscovery. So after Homai stopped taking photographs, she said that she didn't miss photography. But she did say that after this rediscovery of her work happened, it felt like a weight because she was having to think about how to preserve her work. And that had become a burden to her. So you can see a little bit more about her life and how the author spoke with her in this time after her photography, after her son died in the book, and about how it seemed like it was a really peaceful life. She was really integrated into the community, cared about it, cared about the children who were around her, cared about keeping the area clean. So she became a member of that community. And when this book was written, it was released before she died. She didn't die until January 15th, 2012, when she was 98 years old. So she lived a long life. And this is not like every story we talk about on Female First. Sometimes we're missing a lot of that person's work. They weren't recognized until many, many years after their death, even. In this case, her biography was documented in a lot of her words through a direct relationship with her through the author of that book. And a lot of her photographs still exist. A lot of her letters still exist. And we get to know about her story. So that's the end of Homai's story.
Man, she outlived everyone.
Yeah, I know, honestly.
2012 was not that long ago.
Right.
Seriously.
Well, that makes sense of like her liking these different ranges of movies. I was like, oh, okay, that makes more sense.
I love that so much was documented about her. She seems like such a very interesting, multifaceted person. And she did have a lot of interests that kind of surprised me. Like, oh, these movies, or oh, macrame, or just, which I love. And I'm really glad to have this context of how she liked to photograph people, because I think that will help me appreciate the photographs more, because they do look like, I love the lighting in them, and it is natural light generally, but it does look like she just snatched something in the right moment and she captured this thing. And to hear that was so important to her, and she really did it. Like they're kind of arresting images. I don't know how to describe it, but listeners, go look it up, because she really did capture so much in just these images she was taking.
I really enjoyed looking at her photographs. I really felt like I was put in the moments she was in. I really felt like I felt the energy of whatever was happening in the moment through looking at her pictures. Like, she really clearly did have a gift for taking these photos and was very dedicated to it. Clearly, like, she spoke about her patience. And I think there was even a moment that I didn't talk about in the episode where she was photographing someone, and I think she was on top of some boxes and ended up falling off of them because the room was small and she didn't have like a wide angle lens, and she had to take the picture. So she had to get on top of some boxes and take it from like a top down perspective, and she fell. So it was a lot of stuff like that. I think there was another moment where she somebody pushed her, and somebody pushed somebody else, and they got pushed into her, and she got pushed into somebody. And I think she might have even gotten shoved into whoever the dignitary was that she was photographing. Anyway, look, she did what she had to do to get those moments on film. And I can tell that by looking at her photos. I do really love her story. I am also fascinated by her politics and how she said that she felt about other women and having a hard time getting into relationships, like friendships with women. So I really highly encourage everyone to look at Homai's photos.
Yeah, I was just thinking like she was around for all the big changes. When it comes to like photography, the amount of changes that happened within a short amount of time and the discord among photographers, such as like going from film to digital to Photoshop to phones. Like she was around for all of that. I wonder what her thoughts were. She also seemed very satisfied. Like her lifespan where she's retired and not have to pick up the camera again speaks about how she felt fulfilled in her work, which I think rarely anyone can say in their lifetime.
Yes, definitely. Like I think if you can get to a point where you say, I think I've done enough photography, I'm good with what I've done. I think that she clearly was satisfied with her work. And also like having to be in those rooms, I'm sure is also it's physically demanding. So there comes a point where like, I'm sure that, it gets old. And because she seems like she was satisfied with her creative work, that was just like, okay, it's time for all of that to be over and then enjoy this next new phase of my life, which she clearly did since she started crafting and joining groups.
Made some women friends.
Mm-hmm.
Also, gotta love the astrology part in the beginning. Worked out.
Yes, worked out well. Shout out to that astrologer.
Well, thank you so much, as always, Yves, for being with us. We always love having you. This was such a great story. This is another one that I'm like, why we need to see this docuseries. I would love to watch it.
Yeah.
But where can the good listeners find you?
Y'all can go to my website. It's probably the easiest. My website is yvesjeffcoat.com. That's spelled YVESJEFFCOAT.com. And you can sign up for my newsletter. You can get to all the other things from there. But if you want to go directly to Instagram, you can find me at Not Apologizing. You can also go to many other episodes here of Stuff Mom Never Told You. There are plenty of episodes to dig through of women in history and their accomplishments and how they pioneered in their fields. So listen to all those episodes of Female First. If you haven't, you have a lot of catching up to do.
Yes, listeners, and go catch up if you haven't already. Well, yes, thank you so much, Yves, for being here. If you would like to contact us, you can. Our email is hello@stuffinevertoldyou.com. We're also on Blue Sky at Mom Stuff Podcast, or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff I Never Told You. We're also on YouTube. We have some new merchandise at Cotton Bureau, and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer, Christina, our executive producer, Maya, and our contributor, Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is production by iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.